They say love stories begin with a kiss, but sometimes they begin with a promise whispered under city lights, a promise that one day becomes the sharpest knife. Ethan told her, "You're my forever, Amara." And for a long time she believed him, believed in forever the way children believe in stars, because they need to. But this isn't a story about how love ends. It's about what happens after, about the woman who learned that the taste of forever can turn to ashes, and how she used those ashes to build a kingdom of her own. Before we dive in, take a breath and stay with this story till the end. If you've ever loved too deeply, lost too hard, or had to rebuild from nothing, this story is for you. So don't forget to like, share your thoughts, and follow for the next chapters. Because trust me, what's coming will stay with you long after the last word fades. Lisbon glowed like gold dust scattered across the river that night. The city hummed with the sound of trams, fado music, and the quiet ache of people chasing dreams. Amara stood on the balcony of their apartment, her skin kissed by the ocean wind, her heart full of the kind of hope that makes people blind. Inside, Ethan poured champagne into 2 glasses. The bubbles rose like promises too fragile to last. He had just been offered the European directorship at his consulting firm. A leap, he called it, for both of us. Amara had left everything behind in Atlanta, her job, her friends, her family, her rhythm. She told herself it was love, not surrender. She told herself that sometimes you have to lose your ground to build a new sky. "Can you believe this view?" Ethan asked, stepping behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I can," she whispered, "because you're in it." For a moment, it felt like forever really was something you could touch. The city lights glittered across the water, and she imagined their future stretching wide and bright. A house, a family, a life built on laughter and shared dreams. But love, she would later learn, doesn't crumble all at once. It unravels slowly, thread by thread, until one day you look down and realize you're holding nothing but the ends. At first, Lisbon was a fairy tale. Mornings spent at pastel-colored cafes, her laptop open as she pretended to work on freelance projects. Afternoons exploring the maze of Alfama, capturing pictures for a blog no one read. Ethan would come home late, smelling of wine and ambition, telling stories about client dinners and cultural adaptation. She'd listen, proud and patient, pretending not to notice that the space between them was quietly expanding. The city that once shimmered began to hum with loneliness. Even the lights seemed colder somehow. When Ethan forgot their anniversary, just once, he said, she brushed it off. When he started correcting her Portuguese in front of his colleagues, she laughed it away. When he stopped touching her hair, stopped calling her my muse, she told herself he was just tired. But deep down, she felt it. The slow erosion of being unseen. The way a woman can disappear long before she's gone. One evening, she found herself at a dinner party, surrounded by Ethan's European colleagues and their elegant spouses. Their laughter filled the marble courtyard like champagne bubbles, bright, brittle, and temporary. Amara smiled, made polite conversation, nodded at jokes she didn't understand. But each word felt like a translation of a translation, her voice traveling too far just to be heard. "Your wife is stunning," one man told Ethan, his tone polite but surprised, as though her beauty required justification. "Thank you," Ethan said easily. "She's adjusting." Adjusting. The word landed like a stone in her chest. Later that night, when she mentioned how small it made her feel, Ethan kissed her forehead and said, "Don't take everything so personally, Amara." They just meant it as a compliment, but she knew what they meant. She saw it in their eyes, the subtle calculation, the silent question. How did he end up with her? The next morning, she stood on the balcony again, the same spot where forever had once been promised. The air tasted of salt and regret. The city below moved on without her, radiant and indifferent. She looked at the empty champagne glasses on the table and wondered how something so beautiful could go flat so fast. Love, she thought, is like that. Effervescent at first, then still, then gone. What she didn't know, not yet, was that the end she feared was only the beginning. That buried beneath the ashes of that broken promise was the blueprint of her rebirth. Because someday soon, the woman who once whispered, I can't do this without him, would become the woman everyone else would whisper about. How did she rise like that? And that's when she'd finally taste forever again. But this time, it would be her own. Lisbon woke each morning in layers of gold. Terracotta rooftops catching the first light. Seagulls cutting through the sky. Trams rattling up the hills like patient ghosts. But for Amara, the city had lost its warmth. The same sunlight that painted the Tagus River in honey now exposed what she didn't want to see. How small her world had become. When she first arrived, she had tried to build a rhythm. She found a cafe near their apartment, Café du Mar, where the barista learned her order by heart. One mea de leite, one pastel de nata, a smile that almost convinced her she belonged. She'd open her laptop, pretending to write marketing proposals while scrolling through photos of her old life. Atlanta's skyline, her mother's Sunday dinners, her friends laughing under neon lights. Here, conversations swirled around her in Portuguese she couldn't follow. Even English carried an accent she couldn't quite translate. She was surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Ethan, meanwhile, had never looked more alive. He moved through Lisbon like the city was made for him. His linen shirts, his easy laughter, his confidence melting barriers that held her back. He came home late smelling of espresso and success, speaking about projects, investors, the cultural adjustments his team was making. When she told him she felt invisible, he smiled, distracted, and said, "You just need time. You'll find your people." But time only deepened the silence. She started counting the days by small failures, the job applications unanswered, the Portuguese lessons she kept rescheduling, the nights Ethan forgot to text he'd be late. Every empty evening felt heavier than the one before. One night, she walked along the river alone. The tide whispered against the stones, and the wind carried laughter from the nearby bars. She watched couples drinking wine on the docks, their faces glowing in the lamplight. For a moment, she imagined herself among them, carefree and wanted. But the illusions shattered when she saw her reflection in a shop window, a woman out of place in her own life. That's when she realized she was living inside a story where she no longer had a line. At Ethan's firm events, she tried to play her part. She smiled through introductions, careful not to mispronounce names, careful to laugh at the right moments. But every compliment carried an edge. "You're so articulate, so elegant in your own way. You must be very proud of your husband." The words dripped with polite condescension, and each one carved a little more out of her. Ethan didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to. When she mentioned how people treated her, how their smiles lingered too long, how their questions felt like tests, he sighed. "Amara, not everything is about race." "No," she said quietly. "Just the parts of my life you don't have to think about." He turned away, the silence between them thicker than the Lisbon air. Days stretched into months. The apartment that once echoed with jazz and laughter now held only the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled traffic below. She'd light candles at night just to feel warmth. She bought flowers, then forgot to change the water. Everything wilted faster than it should have. She started walking through the city alone, tracing streets until her feet hurt. Lisbon was dazzling. Blue tiles, sunlight bouncing off glass, music spilling from open windows. But its beauty mocked her. She was surrounded by color, and yet she felt gray. In the afternoons, she'd sit at Miradoro da Senhora do Monte, watching the city from above. It looked peaceful from a distance, like a painting, but she knew that beauty could be cruel when you were trapped inside it. Sometimes she wondered if this was what it meant to love someone ambitious, to always be the shadow beside their light. Ethan was thriving in a world that had no room for her. He didn't need to say it. She saw it in how he stood straighter around his colleagues, how his laughter came easier when she wasn't near. The first time he forgot to kiss her goodbye, she told herself it was nothing. The second time, she didn't bother reminding him. One evening, she waited at home with a table set for two. A slow dinner, a bottle of red, soft music playing from her phone. Ethan had texted, "Running late, save me a plate." By 11, the food had gone cold. By midnight, she was sitting alone in the dark, the city lights flickering through the curtains like cruel stars. When he finally came in, tie undone, eyes bright with adrenaline. He kissed her cheek absently. The team went for drinks. Clara was there. She's incredible. You'd love her. Something inside Amara stiffened at the name. Clara. He said it with admiration, not affection, but the sound still burned. Later, as he showered, she scrolled through his firm's social page. A new post. A photo of Ethan and his team celebrating their expansion. He stood beside a tall woman in a white dress, her smile confident, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Clara Lefevre, creative director, Paris office. Amara stared at the image until the screen dimmed. Her husband's happiness looked like a life she was no longer invited to. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city outside glowed, indifferent and endless. The tram bell echoed faintly through the streets, and she realized how long it had been since she'd heard her own laughter. Lisbon was supposed to be a new beginning. Instead, it had become a mirror, showing her everything she didn't want to see. A woman fading quietly from her own story. But what she couldn't know, not yet, was that every disappearance is also an awakening in disguise. That even in the most dazzling cities, shadows hold their own kind of light, and hers was just beginning to flicker. Rua Garrett shimmered under the Lisbon night like a thread of gold stitched through black silk. The air smelled of rain and roasted chestnuts, the city humming softly beneath its lamps. Inside Solar do Paso, one of Ethan's favorite restaurants, crystal glasses clinked and conversation rose like music. It was the kind of place where the waiters spoke in whispers and success wore perfume. Amara arrived a few minutes early, as she always did. She'd spent the afternoon getting ready, her curls arranged into a soft halo, her emerald dress catching the light with each movement. It was Ethan's promotion dinner, his celebration, his night. She wanted to look like the woman who had believed in him before the title, before the marble office, before Lisbon had turned him into someone she barely recognized. When Ethan entered, his colleagues followed in a wave of laughter and energy. He looked radiant in a tailored suit, the glow of achievement all over him. For a brief moment, when their eyes met across the room, she saw a flicker of the man she'd once known, the one who used to hold her hand under the table just to make her smile. "God, you look beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek. Her heart lifted. "So do you." "Congratulations, Mr. Director," he laughed softly. "It's just another step." But even as he spoke, his eyes darted toward the door. That was when she walked in. Clara Lefevre, tall, effortless, draped in ivory silk that shimmered with the faintest blush of pink. She carried herself like she belonged to every room she entered, and the room responded accordingly. Conversations quieted, heads turned. Even the candlelight seemed to follow her. Ethan's posture changed, shoulders straightened, smile sharpened. His voice lifted in greeting. "Clara, you made it." They embraced like old friends reunited, though Amara knew they'd met only weeks ago. The sound of her name in his mouth was soft, almost reverent. Introductions followed like a choreography Amara had not rehearsed. "Amara, this is Clara Lefevre, our new creative director from Paris. Clara, my wife." Clara's handshake was light, her accent melodic. "It's lovely to finally meet you. Ethan speaks so highly of you." The words were polished, practiced, and utterly hollow. As dinner unfolded, Amara watched from a distance of only a few feet, yet it felt like miles. The laughter, the inside jokes in French, the way Ethan's hand brushed Clara's as they leaned over a presentation on his phone. It all played out like a private language in which she was no longer fluent. Her glass of wine trembled slightly in her hand. She focused on the details around her, the glint of silverware, the flicker of candlelight, the low hum of fado music playing somewhere nearby. Anything to avoid the sight of her husband gazing at another woman, as if she were the answer to a question Amara didn't know he'd been asking. When the waiter poured more wine, Amara smiled, polite and still. Years of composure wrapped around her like armor. She had mastered the art of appearing fine. But when Clara began telling a story about a campaign she'd led in Paris, a story punctuated by Ethan's laughter and admiration, something inside Amara splintered. He used to look at her that way. He used to finish her sentences. Now he was fluent in someone else's rhythm. The night stretched on, and with every toast, every shared glance, the air between them grew colder. At one point, Ethan touched Amara's hand under the table, a reflex more than affection, and she realized she felt nothing, not even anger, just absence. When dessert arrived, she excused herself and stepped outside into the Lisbon night. The rain had begun again, light and persistent. Rua Garrett shimmered beneath it, alive with footsteps and laughter. She stood there for a long time, her reflection trembling in the puddles, her breath visible in the cool air. She thought of Atlanta, of her mother's kitchen, of warmth that didn't need translation. She thought of the girl she'd been, the one who believed love was enough. And she wondered, for the first time, what would happen if she stopped believing. Inside, the dinner continued without her. Through the glass, she saw Ethan leaning in close to listen as Clara spoke, his expression lit with fascination. He didn't notice she was gone. When she finally returned, the plates had been cleared, the laughter louder. Ethan looked up and smiled, but it was the kind of smile given to a guest, not a partner. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she lied. "Everything's perfect." On the way home, the silence between them was heavy, almost physical. The tram clattered past cobblestone streets, the sound echoing through the quiet. Ethan scrolled through his phone. Amara watched the city blur outside the window. Finally, she spoke. "You barely talked to me tonight." He sighed. "It was a work event, Amara. I had to mingle. You could have included me. You don't speak French. I can't translate everything." Her voice dropped. "You didn't even try." He turned toward her, irritation flickering in his eyes. "You're overreacting." "No," she whispered. "I'm finally reacting." The tram stopped and he stood to leave, walking ahead without waiting for her. She followed through the drizzle, her heels clicking against the wet stone. The distance between them had never felt so wide. That night, she stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who had followed Ethan across an ocean. The glow was gone. The faith was fading. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Something steady, waiting. It was not strength yet, but it was the beginning of it. In the other room, Ethan's laughter floated faintly from his phone. A message, a voice she didn't recognize. Amara turned off the light and stood in darkness. Outside, Lisbon gleamed, half sun, half shadow. And for the first time she began to see clearly which side she belonged to. The night Lisbon turned cold, the sky was deceptively clear. From their apartment balcony, the city glittered as if nothing cruel could ever happen beneath its lights. The air carried the faint scent of grilled sardines from a nearby cafe and the murmur of distant laughter. It was December, but inside Amara's chest it already felt like winter. She had been waiting for Ethan since 7. Dinner was ready, her attempt at his favorite, piri-piri chicken and roasted potatoes. She'd lit candles, played a playlist of soft jazz, and tried to ignore the clock as it devoured the hours. By 9, the candles had melted into waxy ruins, and the food sat untouched. When he finally walked through the door close to midnight, he looked startled to see her still waiting. "You didn't have to stay up," he said, loosening his tie. "I wanted to," she replied. "We haven't had dinner together in 2 weeks." He kissed her cheek absently and moved past her. She caught a faint trace of expensive perfume, floral, sophisticated, and not hers. "Ethan," she said quietly, "we need to talk." He froze for a second, then exhaled like a man stepping into something inevitable. "Yeah," he said, pulling out a chair. "We probably should." The air seemed to thicken. The city sounds below faded, replaced by the sharp ticking of the clock on the wall. "This isn't working, Amara." She stared at him. No build-up, no cushioning, just the words, flat and final. Her hands trembled on the table. "You mean tonight? Us, the dinner?" "I mean everything." Silence. A long, stunned silence. She had rehearsed 100 conversations in her mind, but not this one. In those versions, they fought, they cried, they promised to fix it. Not once had she imagined him speaking with such calm certainty, as if love were a business he'd decided to close. "I don't understand," she whispered. "We've had rough patches before, but we can." He shook his head. "It's more than a rough patch. We've grown apart." Her voice cracked. "You're not even trying to grow back." He looked down, as if ashamed, but when he spoke again, the words were a blade. "I've met someone, Amara." The room tilted. For a moment she thought she'd misheard. Someone? He nodded. Clara. Her name hit like ice water. She laughed, a broken, humorless sound. Of course, Clara. The woman you said I'd love. Ethan's expression tightened. It wasn't supposed to happen. We just connected. Connected? Her voice rose. You connected while I was here trying to keep us from falling apart. He sighed, the practiced sigh of a man who had already rewritten the story to make himself the reasonable one. You deserve someone who makes you happy. And Stop, she cut in. Don't you dare dress this up as generosity. For the first time, his composure cracked. I can't pretend anymore, Amara. She understands my world. Your world? She repeated. The world I helped you build? The one I moved across an ocean for. He looked away. You never fit in here. You hate it. I hate what it's turned you into. He flinched, just slightly, but she saw it. When he finally spoke, his tone softened, almost pitying. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. She stood, trembling, fury and heartbreak braided together. Then why are you doing it? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Somewhere outside, a tram bell rang, a hollow sound that cut through the silence like a verdict. She turned toward the window. The reflection in the glass showed two strangers, a man who had already left and a woman who hadn't realized yet that she was alone. You once said I was your forever, she whispered. He hesitated. At the time, I believed it. The cruelty wasn't in his words. It was in his sincerity. Amara felt something inside her splinter quietly. No explosion, no dramatic collapse, just a clean break, the kind that doesn't bleed until later. So what now? She asked. I'll stay with a friend for a while. Then I'll figure out the rest. A friend, she repeated, her voice hollow. You mean her? He didn't deny it. Amara laughed again, this time almost gently, as if comforting herself. You've planned this, haven't you? All of it. The timing, the excuses, the grown-apart speech. I wanted to be honest, he said. Honesty doesn't come after betrayal, Ethan. It comes before. The clock struck midnight. The sound echoed through the room, each chime another nail in the coffin of what they had been. When he left, he didn't look back. The door closed softly, too softly for the devastation it carried. For a long time, Amara didn't move. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the evidence of her waiting. The cold dinner, the wilted candles, the half-empty wineglass. Outside, Lisbon's lights blinked indifferently, as if the city had already seen too many stories like this one. Finally, she walked to the balcony. The night air stung her face. Below, the river shimmered, a ribbon of dark silver. She thought about how easily water reflected light, how it could look beautiful while hiding its depth. That was love too, she realized. Shallow reflections masking endless depths. She went to the bathroom, splashed her face with cold water, and caught her own reflection. Her eyes looked unfamiliar, tired, yes, but alive in a way she hadn't seen in months. There was grief there, and disbelief, but also something fierce. Not yet strength, but the seed of it. She whispered to the mirror, You survived this. You hear me? You survive it. Down the hallway, the echo of Ethan's departure still lingered like a ghost. But in the quiet that followed, something new began to breathe. A silence that belonged only to her. Lisbon, outside, was still glowing. But for Amara, a different kind of light had just been lit. One that didn't need him to shine. The first morning without him felt unreal. The bed looked too large, too white. The indentation of his pillow still visible like a wound that refused to close. Amara lay still, eyes open, waiting for the familiar rhythm. The sound of the shower running, the click of the coffee machine, the murmur of Ethan's voice reading headlines aloud. But the apartment was silent, the kind of silence that roared. Outside, Lisbon went on glowing, indifferent. Trams rattled down Rua Augusta, tourists chattered, and the smell of baked bread drifted through the air. The city was alive, but inside her, everything had gone still. She forced herself out of bed. The mirror caught her reflection. Puffy eyes, a face drained of expression. The kind of face grief carves before words catch up. She touched the glass, half expecting it to ripple, half hoping she could step through to somewhere that didn't ache. The day blurred. She moved through the apartment in fragments, pouring coffee she didn't drink, opening her laptop, closing it again. Ethan's things were gone, except for the ghosts. A shirt button under the couch, a faint trace of his cologne in the hallway, proof that he had once filled this space with noise and warmth and careless laughter. By afternoon, she found herself sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the fridge, surrounded by pieces of a life she no longer recognized. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears stayed somewhere deep, locked behind exhaustion. The real collapse wasn't loud. It was the quiet surrender of realizing no one was coming back. The days that followed melted into each other. Time stopped being measured in hours. It became a sequence of tasks she performed just to keep breathing. Wake up, pretend to eat, scroll through messages from friends back home and type, "I'm fine." Close the curtains before nightfall because the city's lights made her feel too exposed. She stopped answering calls from her mother, afraid her voice would crack under love. She ignored texts from colleagues in Atlanta asking when she'd return. To go back would mean admitting failure, and she couldn't bear to let the world see her broken. So she stayed. Lisbon became a strange companion, beautiful and cruel, a city that refused to mourn with her. She walked its streets like a ghost, invisible among its brilliance. The pastel buildings, the sea breeze, the laughter spilling from cafes, it all mocked her. Happiness was everywhere, except where she stood. At Café Del Mar, the barista stopped asking where Ethan was. She'd smile politely, hand Amara her coffee, and glance away. That small shift, kindness replaced by pity, hurt more than the loneliness itself. Sometimes, Amara wandered to the river, standing where the water licked the stone embankment. She'd watch the reflections shimmer and think about how quickly a surface could lie. From a distance, even broken water looks whole. The breakdown came quietly, in layers. First, sleep disappeared, then appetite, then purpose. Her world shrank to the few square meters of the apartment. She counted the hours by how often the light moved across the floor. The plants wilted. The candles she'd once lit for warmth now gathered dust. But grief has a strange rhythm. It dulls you until something sharp cuts through again. For her, it was a supermarket. 2 weeks after Ethan left, she went to buy groceries. A small victory, she told herself. Something normal. She walked the aisles in silence, basket in hand, picking up wine, bread, milk. And then she saw them. Ethan and Clara. They stood by the fruit display, laughing at something on his phone. Clara's hand rested on his arm, casual, intimate. He looked lighter, freer, as if heartbreak was something that had only happened to one of them. Amara froze. Her throat tightened, her body rooted in place. She tried to turn away, but he noticed her. For a second, their eyes met. Surprise flickered across his face, then guilt, then something worse, discomfort. The kind you feel when a memory walks in wearing skin and breath. "Amara," he said, stepping forward. She didn't answer. The wine bottle slipped from her hand. It hit the floor and shattered, red spilling across the tiles, spreading like a wound. The sound cut through the hum of the store. People turned. A worker rushed forward with paper towels, murmuring, "Tutto bene. Are you okay?" But she wasn't. She muttered an apology, left her basket where it was, and walked out. Her chest burned, her hands shaking. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside, and the tears finally came. Hot, uncontrollable, silent at first, then breaking open. She didn't remember how she got home. Only that when she closed the apartment door behind her, she slid down against it and cried until she had nothing left. The kind of crying that feels like drowning without water. For days after, she didn't speak to anyone. The curtains stayed closed, the phone unanswered. When her sister called from Atlanta, Amara stared at the ringing screen until it went dark. It wasn't just the loss of Ethan. It was the loss of the version of herself who believed she was chosen, loved, safe. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone hollow, learning how to exist on muscle memory alone. Then, one evening, as the sun set over the city, her phone buzzed again. A message from her younger sister, Maya. "You don't have to be strong today. Just promise me you'll still be here tomorrow." That line, so simple, so soft, cut through the fog. Amara reread it again and again until the words became a rhythm in her chest. Still be here. Still be here. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a flicker of defiance. She got up, opened the curtains, and let the last light of the day pour into the room. The city stretched before her, messy, loud, alive. And though she still felt broken, she realized she was still breathing. The quiet collapse had happened, but beneath it, something had survived. Something small, something stubborn, something that, one day, would rise. It began as an ordinary afternoon, the kind that should have passed without memory. The sun fell softly over Lisbon, warm enough to make the air shimmer. Amara told herself she was ready, ready to step outside, ready to exist again among people who weren't watching her fall apart. She put on sunglasses to hide the sleeplessness in her eyes, tied her curls in a loose knot, and walked down the street to the supermarket at the corner of Avenida da Liberdade. The automatic doors opened with a sigh, releasing the cool hum of air conditioning and the faint scent of oranges. She took a basket and moved through the aisles in silence. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine something like normal life. Pasta, olive oil, bread. It was almost comforting, how ordinary things waited for her, unchanged. She reached for a bottle of wine, one she and Ethan had once shared during quieter times, before love turned into negotiation. Her hand hovered on the label, remembering laughter that no longer existed. She placed it carefully into the basket and kept moving. Near the produce section, a sound of laughter, low, familiar, made her pause. Her heart recognized it before her mind did. She turned. There he was, Ethan, his posture relaxed, his smile easy, the light catching his hair in the way it used to when she called him beautiful. But it wasn't her reflection in his eyes anymore. Standing beside him, her hand resting casually on his arm, was Clara. They looked like a photograph of happiness. Ethan held a basket filled with fresh herbs, a bottle of white wine, 2 lemons. The scene was so painfully domestic that Amara almost laughed. It was the ordinariness of it that broke her, the simplicity of seeing her old life lived by someone else. For a second, she thought about hiding, about slipping into another aisle, disappearing before he could see her. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Ethan turned, mid-laugh, and froze. Their eyes met. It was only a heartbeat, but it stretched into eternity. Shock flickered across his face, then guilt, then discomfort. The silence between them was louder than any confrontation. Clara followed his gaze, her expression tightening when she saw Amara. "Amara," Ethan said quietly, as if saying her name might soften the reality of it. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her hand tightened around the handle of the basket until her knuckles turned white. She could hear the hum of the refrigerators, the murmur of a distant conversation, the faint squeak of a cartwheel. Every sound was sharper, as if the world wanted her to remember every second of this humiliation. Ethan took a hesitant step forward. "How have you been?" That question, so ordinary, so cruel, was the spark. Something inside her trembled, fragile and furious. "How have I been?" she repeated, her voice low, trembling. "You really want to ask me that here?" Clara looked away, pretending to check the fruit display. Her detachment was worse than disdain. It was ownership. Amara's chest tightened. She felt the tremor before it happened. The wine bottle slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a shattering crack. Red spilled across the white tile, spreading like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The sound silenced the aisle. Heads turned. Someone gasped. A worker hurried over, speaking rapid Portuguese, grabbing paper towels. "Está tudo bem?" But Amara couldn't answer. She stared at the mess, the red, the shards, the reflection of the ceiling lights in the broken glass. It looked like a scene from someone else's story. Ethan bent slightly, as if to help, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said sharply. The single word cut through the air. He straightened, guilt twisting across his face. "I didn't mean for—" "You meant every part of it," she interrupted. "You just didn't think I'd have to watch." Her voice trembled, but she didn't care. The people around them faded. All that existed was this moment, this cruel theater of endings. Clara touched Ethan's arm lightly. "Maybe we should go," she murmured, her tone gentle but final. The kind of tone people use when they've already won. And he listened. He nodded, whispered, "Take care, Amara," and walked away. That was the moment something inside her truly broke, not with noise but with silence. Watching the man who once called her home walk away, hand in hand with the woman who replaced her, under the indifferent hum of fluorescent lights. When they disappeared down the aisle, Amara knelt down to pick up the shards of glass. The worker tried to stop her, but she insisted. Her fingers brushed against the edges, sharp and cold. One piece caught her skin, drawing a thin line of blood. She watched it bead, small and red against her brown hand. It didn't even hurt, she whispered almost to herself. At least something still bleeds. When she finally stepped outside, the air felt too bright. The city buzzed with life, cars honking, music playing from a nearby cafe. But she felt distant from all of it, as if she were walking underwater. The world had moved on, and she was still drowning. By the time she reached her apartment, her hands were trembling again. She dropped her keys on the table, sat on the floor, and let the tears come. Not graceful tears, not cinematic heartbreak, just raw, ugly sobbing that echoed through the empty space. It was the first time she cried without restraint, the first time she let herself admit that love had not merely left, it had abandoned. When she finally quieted, she realized something. The silence that followed wasn't as heavy as before. Somewhere between the shattering and the tears, a strange clarity had emerged. This was rock bottom, the point where there was nothing left to lose. And in that emptiness, a whisper, a quiet defiance began to form. "You are still here," the thought startled her. She looked around the dim apartment, the scattered books, the undone bed, the withered plants. None of it looked like a life, and yet it was hers. For the first time, she felt a pulse beneath the grief. Not strength, not yet, but the faint beginning of something new. A heartbeat that belonged only to her. The city outside glowed like a promise she didn't believe in yet, but perhaps one day would. And in that fragile silence, still smelling faintly of wine and salt tears, Amara whispered to herself, "This is not the end." It wasn't. It was the first spark in the dark. For days after the supermarket incident, Amara stayed inside. The world outside her window looked too bright, too merciless. Lisbon kept living, children laughing in the street, church bells ringing from the hill, seagulls swooping across a sun-bleached sky. But she felt like a ghost drifting between minutes. Her apartment had become both refuge and prison. The curtains stayed half-drawn, letting in just enough light to remind her that the world was still turning. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and rain. The plants she'd once watered weekly now stood brown and bowed, like tiny monuments to neglect. But grief, she discovered, is an impatient visitor. It doesn't sit quietly. It starts to move furniture inside you. Some mornings she woke up furious. Other days she felt nothing at all. Both were exhausting. Then, one Sunday, the stillness became unbearable. She dressed in jeans and a faded sweatshirt, tied a scarf around her curls, and stepped outside. The air was sharp with the smell of the ocean, the kind of day when Lisbon glows like it's been washed clean. She didn't have a plan. She just needed to walk until her thoughts ran out of breath. The city had always been beautiful, but now she noticed it differently. The cracks in the walls, the laundry flapping like surrender flags, the sound of a distant guitar from a street corner. Beauty wasn't a comfort anymore. It was a witness. She ended up in a small cafe she hadn't noticed before, tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore, its door painted a fading turquoise. Inside, soft music played, the kind that feels like remembering something you can't name. She ordered tea and sat by the window, watching people pass. And that's when she saw her, a young black woman, maybe in her mid-20s, walking with a confidence that shimmered. Her head was wrapped in a golden scarf that caught the light like fire. She laughed at something on her phone, a full, unguarded laugh. And in that instant, the entire street seemed to bend toward her warmth. Amara couldn't look away. It wasn't envy, it was recognition. The girl's joy looked effortless, but Amara knew what it cost to walk through the world wearing your difference proudly. She knew what it meant to claim space in places that didn't expect you to. The woman caught her gaze through the cafe window and smiled. An easy, genuine smile, like sunlight finding its way into a dark room. Then, without hesitation, she came inside. "Hey," she said, pausing by Amara's table. I love your curls. It was such a small thing, a stranger's compliment. But Amara felt her throat tighten. When was the last time anyone had said something kind without agenda or pity? Thank you, she managed to say. Your scarf is beautiful. The woman laughed softly. It's my armor. Every time I wrap it, I remind myself who I am. Amara smiled, the first real one in weeks. That's a good reminder. Especially when the world tries to make you forget, the woman replied. They spoke for a few minutes, about nothing and everything. Her name was Selah. She was from Ghana, living in Lisbon for a graduate program in design. She told Amara about her favorite market stalls, the best place for live music, the park that smelled of jasmine at night. Before leaving, Selah said, if you ever need company, come to the Sunday art market by the docks. It's full of dreamers. You'd fit right in. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of citrus and a strange quietness that wasn't sadness, but possibility. Amara sat there long after her tea went cold. The golden scarf still glimmered in her mind, vivid against the gray haze of her thoughts. It felt like a message from the universe, disguised as a girl with laughter in her voice. When she left the cafe, something in her had shifted. It wasn't visible, not yet, but it was real. The smallest fracture in her grief where light could enter. That evening, she took a shower and stood under the water until her skin flushed. She washed her hair, combed through the curls she'd ignored for weeks, and left them natural, soft, and unapologetic. For the first time in a long while, she saw herself clearly. Not the version who'd been left, but the woman who was still here. She opened her window and let the sound of the city in, the rhythm of footsteps, the echo of distant laughter, the smell of roasted almonds from a vendor below. Lisbon hadn't changed, but her place within it had begun to. That night she dreamed of light, not the blinding kind that exposes, but the warm kind that finds its way through cracks. In the morning she put on her brightest scarf, a deep red one she'd bought months ago but never worn, and walked to the art market. The air buzzed with music and chatter, the docks alive with color and sound. She didn't expect to find Salah again, but there she was, waving, her golden scarf fluttering in the breeze. Amara, she called out. You came! Amara smiled, feeling something stir in her chest, something dangerously close to hope. The two women walked through the stalls, surrounded by paintings, jewelry, and laughter. The sunlight fell across Amara's face, warm and unafraid. In that moment, she realized she wasn't broken beyond repair. She was simply becoming someone new, someone who could stand in the sunlight again, not as a shadow of what was lost, but as proof that even the shattered can still shine. As the afternoon faded into gold, Selah turned to her and said, You see, the world isn't done with you yet. Amara didn't answer. She just looked at the water, the light dancing on its surface like tiny mirrors. And for the first time in months, she believed it might be true. The woman with the golden scarf had appeared and vanished like a vision, but her presence lingered, stitched into Amara's heart. Because sometimes, healing doesn't arrive as a miracle. It walks in quietly, smiles, and reminds you that you still belong to the world. And that was the day Amara's silence cracked wide enough for her to breathe again. The morning began quietly, with sunlight crawling across the floor like a slow confession. The city was waking, tram bells, voices, the rustle of curtains being drawn. But inside Amara's apartment, time still felt fragile. She stood barefoot before the mirror, wrapped in a towel, her breath fogging the glass. The woman looking back at her was someone she hadn't met in months. Eyes swollen from crying, hair damp, skin dulled from nights without sleep. She traced the curve of her collarbone with her fingers, as if touching the outline of a stranger. It struck her how much of herself she had lost in the small, ordinary acts of loving him. How her laughter had softened to match his. How her edges had been sanded down to fit the shape of his comfort. She had thought that kind of devotion was romantic. But now, staring at her reflection, she realized it was erosion. For a long time she said nothing. The silence in the room was thick, alive. Then, quietly, she whispered, "Who are you?" The woman in the mirror didn't answer. Amara stared harder until her eyes stung. And then, as if pulled from somewhere deeper than language, the words came. No. It was soft at first, just a breath of resistance. But then she said it again, louder this time. No, it wasn't to Ethan. Not to the past, not to Clara, not even to Lisbon. It was to everything that had kept her small. No, to shrinking herself to make others comfortable. No, to waiting for closure from someone who had already left. No, to the belief that she was replaceable, forgettable, disposable. The word filled the room like a pulse, echoing against the walls. For the first time, she wasn't collapsing. She was confronting. She stood taller, shoulders back, the morning light cutting across her face. Her reflection didn't look softer anymore. It looked alive. Amara dressed slowly that day, deliberately. Jeans, white blouse, red scarf. The one she'd worn to the market was Salah. She left her curls wild, her lips bare, her jewelry simple. There was a strength in that simplicity, a quiet refusal to hide. When she stepped outside, the world felt different. The sky seemed bluer, the air cleaner, the sound of the trams almost musical. The same city that had once suffocated her now looked open, wide, forgiving. She walked aimlessly, without a destination, letting her feet decide. Every corner she turned seemed to whisper something. You're still here. You're still choosing. At one intersection, she stopped to watch an elderly couple holding hands as they crossed the street. They moved slowly, deliberately, their steps perfectly in sync. It wasn't their love that moved her. It was their steadiness, that unspoken promise. I'll walk with you, no matter how long it takes. She realized she had to learn to walk with herself that way, patiently, tenderly, without apology. Later, she wandered into a small thrift store tucked behind a line of jacaranda trees. The smell of old wood and fabric filled the air. She ran her hands over dresses, shoes, old postcards written in languages she couldn't read. A mirror leaned against the wall, cracked slightly at the corner. She caught her reflection again, this time surrounded by fragments of other lives, each shard reflecting a different piece of her. It felt symbolic, almost too much so, but she didn't look away. Instead, she smiled faintly and whispered, "Maybe it's okay to be a little cracked." The shopkeeper, an older Portuguese woman with kind eyes, noticed her and said something in a soft accent. "Broken glass still shines, Querida." Amara nodded. "Yes, it does." That evening, back home, she sat at her desk for the first time in months. The screen of her laptop glowed expectantly. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. Then she began to type. Not emails, not apologies, but words she hadn't known she needed to write. She titled the document, "The Mirror and the Number." The words poured out of her like water from a burst pipe. She wrote about the ache of loving someone who outgrew you, the loneliness of being invisible, the quiet bravery it takes to exist again after being left behind. She didn't write for an audience. She wrote to find herself in sentences, to see if she could translate her pain into meaning. When she finally stopped, hours had passed. The room was dark except for the glow of the screen. Her chest felt lighter, her hands steady. Writing hadn't healed her, but it had reminded her she was still capable of creating something beautiful out of the wreckage. She leaned back, breathing deeply. The city outside was alive with the hum of Saturday night, the smell of food, laughter echoing up from the streets. For the first time in months, she didn't feel jealous of it. She felt part of it, however distantly. She closed her eyes and remembered Sella's words at the market. "The world isn't done with you yet." Amara smiled. Maybe it was true. Before bed, she walked to the mirror one last time. Her reflection waited, calm and unafraid. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we begin again." She turned off the light, leaving the mirror to hold the last trace of her smile. Outside, Lisbon glowed beneath the moon, half shadow, half light, just like her. And somewhere deep within her, something had shifted forever. It wasn't joy yet, but it was freedom, the kind that begins quietly, with a single, unwavering no. The email came on a Tuesday morning, slipped between bank statements and online store ads. So ordinary it almost went unnoticed. Subject line, "Opportunity, MD Consulting, Lisbon." At first, Amara thought it was spam, but then she saw the name beneath the signature. Lucia Santos, Managing Director. A name that stirred faint recognition. She had read an article months ago about Lucia, a powerhouse in Lisbon's marketing world, known for rebuilding companies with precision and grace. The kind of woman who didn't just break glass ceilings. She designed skylights. Amara stared at the message for a long time before opening it. "Dear Ms. Johnson, I came across your article draft, The Mirror and the No, that's been circulating in a local writers group. It's powerful. I'm not sure if you realize how much truth lives between those lines. I'm leading a campaign that needs a voice like yours. Authentic, sharp, emotional. If you're open to discussing it, I'd like to meet. Lucia. Her first thought was disbelief. The piece she'd written, the one she never intended to publish, had somehow found its way beyond her computer. She reread the email 3 times, her pulse quickening. Then came fear. She hadn't worked in months. Her confidence was still tender, stitched together with fragile thread. The voice in her head whispered, "You're not ready. You'll ruin this." But another voice, quieter, steadier, replied, "You said no to fear once. Say it again." That afternoon she answered, "Yes, I'd love to meet." The cafe where they arranged to meet was near the harbor, glass walls overlooking the restless blue of the Atlantic. Lucia arrived exactly on time. Tall, silver hair tied neatly, eyes sharp but kind. She carried the kind of presence that silenced a room without effort. "Amara," she greeted, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Her voice was low and confident, the kind that made people listen. Amara shook her hand, trying not to let her nerves show. "I read your piece 3 times, Lucia began. It reminded me of myself 20 years ago. Amara blinked. "You?" Lucia smiled faintly. "Yes, I built an empire on strategy and perfection. Then I watched my marriage collapse under its weight. Sometimes we lose everything just to remember who we are without it." Amara said nothing. The words sank deep, heavy and real. "I won't waste your time," Lucia continued. "My firm is expanding. We're launching a global campaign for a sustainability brand. But the board keeps insisting we polish the messaging. They want perfection. I want honesty. I want the kind of voice that doesn't sound like it's trying too hard to be heard." She leaned forward. "That's your voice." Amara hesitated. "I haven't worked in months. I don't even know if I still." Lucia interrupted softly. "You never lose the gift. You just forget it under all the noise." Something inside Amara stirred. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. Lucia slid a folder across the table. "Read it. If it speaks to you, come by my office tomorrow, 10 a.m. Amara nodded, her fingers brushing the folder like it was something fragile. As Lucia stood to leave, she said, "One more thing, Amara. When I hired my first strategist after my divorce, I didn't choose her because she was perfect. I chose her because she was hungry to start again. Don't underestimate hunger." Then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of jasmine and authority. That night, Amara sat at her kitchen table with the folder open before her. The campaign brief was dense, full of data and expectations. But the tagline, "Rebuild the world, one choice at a time," caught her attention. Something in it mirrored her own journey. She worked until dawn, scribbling notes, sketching concepts, words pouring out like rain after drought. By sunrise, she had outlined a full strategy, one rooted not in polish, but in truth. When she arrived at Lucia's office the next morning, her hands trembled slightly as she held her notes. The space was modern, elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A view for people who made things happen. Lucia greeted her with a nod. "You came." "I did." "Good. Let's see what you've got." Amara laid out her ideas. Honest storytelling, real people, emotion over perfection. She spoke faster as her passion took over, her fear melting with every word. When she finished, the room was silent. Lucia smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Amara blinked. "It is?" Lucia leaned back. "You think in feelings before formulas. That's rare. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure you'd show up, but you did. That tells me everything I need to know." She reached across the table, offering her hand again. "Welcome to MD Consulting, Amara." For a moment, Amara couldn't breathe. It felt unreal, the sound of possibility cracking open after months of silence. She shook Lucia's hand, her eyes stinging. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucia smiled knowingly. "Don't thank me. Just prove me right." When Amara left the office, the sunlight hit her face with almost painful brightness. The city below seemed to hum in tune with her pulse. The tram bells, the chatter, the sea breeze, all of it sounded different now, as if Lisbon had been waiting for her to wake up. At a corner cafe, she bought herself a pastry and coffee, sitting by the window, just to feel the ordinary rhythm of life again. She caught her reflection in the glass. Still the same woman, but no longer hollow. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sella. "I saw your piece shared online. You're a writer, Amara. Don't ever forget that." Amara smiled, her throat tightening. She hadn't realized the draft had traveled that far. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not for being someone's partner or someone's loss, but for her own voice. As she watched the light ripple on the river, she thought about Lucia's words. Don't underestimate hunger. Because maybe hunger wasn't emptiness at all. Maybe it was proof that something inside her still wanted more, still believed in more. And as the city glimmered beneath her, Amara realized she was finally, truly, on her way back to herself. The elevator ride to Lucia's office felt longer than it was. Amara stood between mirrored walls, clutching her portfolio against her chest. Her reflection multiplied around her. 5 versions of herself, each holding their breath. She didn't recognize the woman in those reflections completely, but there was something new in her posture, an almost invisible steadiness. When the elevator doors opened, sunlight flooded in. The office stretched out before her, glass, steel, and calm power. People moved with quiet confidence, their conversations blending with the hum of creativity. It wasn't intimidating. It was alive. Lucia was waiting near the window, her back to the Atlantic, phone pressed to her ear. She ended the call, turned, and smiled. "Good. You came early." Amara nodded. "I didn't want to keep you waiting." Lucia gestured toward a chair. "You're not keeping me waiting, Carita. You're beginning." That simple sentence, "you're beginning," settled into Amara's bones like light. They spent the next hour walking through the campaign materials. Lucia quizzed her sharply, interrupting without apology. "Why this tone? Why not lead with empathy instead of urgency? What emotion do you want the audience to feel first?" Each question was a test, and each answer made Amara dig deeper. She spoke of narrative arcs, of truth as marketing's most underrated currency. She spoke of how people don't buy stories, they buy mirrors. Lucia's expression shifted from evaluation to intrigue. At one point, Lucia leaned forward and said, "You talk like someone who's been broken and rebuilt." Amara hesitated. Maybe that's the only kind of person who knows how to rebuild anything. A silence followed, soft but weighted. Lucia smiled, slow and deliberate. "Good. You'll do well here." By the time Amara left the office, her body buzzed with adrenaline. She walked out onto the street, the light bouncing off the glass buildings, and it hit her. She had made it through the interview without shrinking, without apologizing. That evening, she received the call. Lucia's assistant, polite and efficient, said the words Amara would remember forever. "Ms. Santos would like to offer you the position, effective immediately." The world seemed to tilt. For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "Tell her, thank you." When she hung up, she sat very still, her phone in her lap, as tears gathered. Quiet, trembling tears of relief. It wasn't just about work. It was proof she could start again, and that life hadn't finished with her after all. Her first day felt like stepping into a life she'd been rehearsing for without knowing it. Lucia introduced her to the team, her voice warm but firm. "This is Amara Johnson, our new strategy lead. Treat her words as gospel until proven otherwise." The team chuckled, but Amara saw the respect in their eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was acknowledgement. The first week was a blur of meetings, brainstorming sessions, late-night research. She poured herself into the project, weaving her own story into its message without realizing it. Rebuild the world, one choice at a time. Each morning, she woke earlier, walked to work through the narrow Lisbon streets, the smell of coffee and ocean salt in the air. Each night, she returned home tired but fulfilled, her mind humming with possibility. She no longer avoided mirrors. She no longer apologized for taking up space. Lucia often stopped by her desk, arms folded, a faint smile playing at her lips. "You're finding your rhythm," she'd say. "Don't lose it." And Amara would smile back, grateful, though she knew what Lucia really meant. Don't lose yourself again. One evening, after the office had emptied, Amara stayed behind to finalize a presentation. The city outside glowed, streetlights reflecting off the river like liquid gold. Her screen's white light illuminated her face, and for a moment, she saw a reflection in the window. Not the broken woman who had watched her life collapse, but someone new, someone reborn through the very fire that tried to destroy her. The thought made her laugh softly. "So this is what beginning feels like," she whispered. Behind her, Lucia's voice broke the quiet. "Beginnings never feel like victory, Amara. They feel like survival that learned to sing." Amara turned, startled. Lucia leaned against the doorway, a faint smirk softening her usual precision. "I didn't hear you come in," Amara said. "That's the point," Lucia replied. "I wanted to see you in your element." She walked closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "You're not just working, you're rewriting yourself through this project. I can see it." Amara smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what healing is, just telling the story differently until it doesn't hurt as much." Lucia tilted her head. "Or until it turns into power." Their eyes met, two women who had been broken in different ways but rebuilt with the same material. Defiance. When the campaign launched its internal preview, the presentation room filled with executives. Amara stood at the front, clicker in hand, heartbeat steady. The screen behind her flashed the opening line she had written at 3 a.m. "Rebuilding isn't about what you lost. It's about what you choose next." When the video played, footage of real people rebuilding their lives, her narration layered over music that rose and broke like waves. She glanced toward Lucia. The older woman gave the smallest nod. The presentation ended in silence, followed by applause that rolled through the room like a tide. Someone from the board turned to Lucia. "You were right about her." Lucia smiled without taking her eyes off Amara. "I usually am." That night, Amara walked home through Alfama, her heels clicking against the cobblestones. The air was heavy with the scent of grilled fish and orange blossoms. The city felt alive again, not mocking, not indifferent, just alive. When she reached her apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She opened the balcony doors and stood under the open sky. Down below, people were laughing in the street, music spilling from a bar. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. The life she had lost no longer haunted her. It had simply made room for this one. In the quiet between sounds, she heard her own voice again. Steady, certain, hers. And for the first time, Amara didn't feel like she was rebuilding. She felt like she was already reborn. By the time spring rolled over Lisbon, Amara had become the quiet heartbeat of MD Consulting. Her name began to carry weight in the hallways, spoken in that mix of admiration and curiosity reserved for people who surprise everyone, including themselves. She arrived early, stayed late, and moved with the calm precision of someone who had finally found purpose again. But this time, she wasn't working to prove herself to anyone. She was working to reclaim herself. Lucia's campaign, Rebuild the World, One Choice at a Time, had become their obsession. The brand they were representing, a sustainable clothing company called Elan, wanted something groundbreaking, something human. Lucia trusted Amara completely. "It's your vision," she'd said. "Take the lead." So Amara did. She assembled her team, filled the walls with sketches and words, and tore apart every idea that sounded too safe. "If it doesn't make someone feel," she told them, "it doesn't belong here." The concept she built was raw, a montage of ordinary people making small, imperfect choices that led to transformation. No models, no rehearsed smiles, just authenticity. Mothers mending clothes, young activists planting trees in cracked soil, a man recycling his suit after losing his job. Each vignette spoke of starting again, quietly, imperfectly, beautifully. And when it came time to choose the narrator for the campaign's voiceover, Lucia didn't hesitate. "It should be you," she told Amara. Amara blinked. "Me? No one even knows my name." "Exactly," Lucia said. "They'll believe you." The recording session was intimate, a dark studio, a single microphone, a wall of soundproof glass. She sat in front of it, heart pounding, as the producer gestured for her to begin. She took a deep breath and spoke. Her voice, soft, low, steady, filled the space. "We're told that rebuilding takes strength, but sometimes it just takes one quiet decision, the decision to stay, to begin, to believe that even after everything breaks, you still deserve to bloom. When she finished, there was silence in the control room. Then, through the glass, the producer lifted his thumb in quiet awe. "That," he said, "that's the take." The campaign launched 2 weeks later. The video went live at dawn on a Monday, and by noon it had begun to ripple across social media. People shared it not because of the product, but because of the emotion. It wasn't selling clothing. It was selling courage. Comments flooded in. "I don't even know what this is advertising, but I feel something. This made me cry on a bus. Whoever wrote this understands heartbreak." Amara watched the numbers climb from her desk. Within hours, the campaign had gone viral in 6 countries. Reporters requested interviews. Influencers quoted her narration. Her words were everywhere. Lucia called her into her office that afternoon. "Congratulations," she said, smiling in that rare, proud way of hers. "You didn't just sell a story. You reminded people they still have one." Amara exhaled, half in disbelief. "It doesn't feel real." Lucia's eyes softened. "That's because it's finally honest." 3 days later, MD Consulting received an invitation to present their campaign at a European sustainability conference. It was a major honor, televised, attended by executives, creatives, and industry leaders from across the continent. Lucia insisted that Amara be the one to represent the team. "You wrote its soul," she said. "You speak it." Amara hesitated. Public speaking terrified her. But she also knew this was her moment to stand fully in the light she had been hiding from for too long. On the day of the conference, she wore a tailored cream suit and her red scarf. She stood backstage, hands trembling, until Lucia placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You've already lived the story," Lucia whispered. "Now, just tell it." Amara stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. Rows of faces blurred together into a sea of quiet expectation. She began. Her voice didn't shake. She spoke about truth, imperfection, resilience, the art of rebuilding lives one choice at a time. She spoke as someone who had fallen and risen, not in theory but in flesh and bone. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause, loud, thunderous, sustained. For the first time, she didn't shrink from it. Later that evening, at the conference's networking dinner, she stood near the terrace overlooking the river, glass of champagne in hand. The night was cool, the city glittering below. She felt light, proud, at peace. "Amara Johnson," a voice said behind her. "I didn't expect to see you here." She froze. Ethan. He stood a few feet away, wearing the same practiced charm that once made her heart skip. His hair was shorter, his tie slightly loosened. But his expression, surprised, admiring, uncertain, was painfully familiar. "Ethan," she said, her voice even. "Hello. I saw your presentation," he said. "It was incredible." "Thank you." He hesitated. "You've changed." Amara smiled faintly. "I've returned to myself." For a moment, he looked as if he wanted to say more. Then his shoulders dropped. "I'm happy for you." And she believed him, but not in the way he meant it. She saw in his eyes the quiet realization that she had become something he could no longer reach. She nodded politely. "Take care, Ethan." When she turned to leave, he stayed where he was, watching her walk away, the same woman he once left behind, now shining without needing anyone to witness it. That night, as Amara crossed the Praça do Comércio, the sea wind lifted her scarf and carried the scent of salt and spring. She paused for a moment to look out over the dark water. She thought of the girl who had once stood here months ago, heart shattered, staring into that same river and seeing only loss. Now the same water shimmered like a mirror of light. She whispered, almost to herself, "I made it." But she didn't mean the job, the campaign, or the applause. She meant survival. She meant the quiet triumph of still being here. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and for the first time she realized something profound. The world hadn't changed. She had, and that changed everything. The morning sun cut through the glass walls of MD Consulting, scattering across the polished floor in gold streaks. The air smelled faintly of espresso and ambition, two things Amara now carried with quiet mastery. It had been 3 weeks since the conference, and the firm was alive with momentum. The Elan campaign had become a case study in modern marketing, shared in universities, quoted in boardrooms. And at the center of it all was her, the strategist with the voice that made strangers cry. Lucia was proud, though she rarely said it out loud. Instead, she offered more responsibility. "You've proven you can tell stories that move people," she told Amara. "Now, let's see if you can build empires." The next campaign was for a global tech client, a merger between two powerhouse companies rebranding their image. It was high stakes, high visibility, the kind of project that could rewrite careers. Lucia's tone was casual when she delivered the news. "The new partner firm will be joining us for the presentation tomorrow," she said. "They'll handle the European rollout. A consultancy from Geneva, Caldwell and Partners." Amara's pen froze mid-note. The name sliced clean through the air. Lucia noticed. "You know them?" Amara swallowed. "Once," she said. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, the city lights flickering against the ceiling, memories bleeding in where rest should be. Caldwell and Partners, Ethan's company. His name on the door she once followed across an ocean. She had imagined this moment before, in dreams that ended with speeches and revenge. But now that it was real, she didn't want revenge. She wanted silence, control, grace. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly and takes its seat at the head of the table. The next morning, the conference room shimmered with the kind of tension that precedes important meetings. The MD team was ready. Presentations queued, mock-ups printed, every detail polished to perfection. Amara stood by the window, the Lisbon skyline behind her, her reflection calm and composed in the glass. She dressed deliberately, sleek black suit, gold earrings, red lipstick. The same red she used to wear only on anniversaries. When the doors opened, a team of consultants entered. Polished shoes, quiet authority, firm handshakes. And then him. Ethan. He froze for half a second when he saw her, but Amara didn't flinch. She smiled, the kind of smile that could both disarm and distance. "Ethan," she said evenly, extending her hand. "Welcome to MD Consulting." He shook it. "Amara, it's been a long time." "It has." His voice was softer than she remembered, his hair a little thinner, his confidence dimmed just enough for her to notice. He looked human again, not the golden man who had walked out of her life without looking back. Lucia introduced the teams and motioned for them to sit. "Let's begin." The meeting started with formalities, financial forecasts, brand strategies, graphs projected on the wall. Amara spoke with precision, her tone measured and persuasive. She didn't perform, she led. Every sentence landed like a well-placed stone in still water. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to hide his distraction. Every time Amara spoke, his gaze lingered. Not the way it once did with desire, but with recognition. At one point, during a discussion on campaign tone, he interjected, "I think a more analytical approach would make the data stronger." Amara didn't look at him when she replied, "Sometimes the strongest data is human emotion. You can't measure connection with numbers, Mr. Caldwell." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then Lucia smiled faintly. "I agree with Amara." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. By the time the meeting ended, the decision was unanimous. MD Consulting would lead the creative direction. Caldwell and Partners would follow. Lucia closed her notebook and stood. "Excellent work, everyone." She turned to Amara. "Your clarity today was refreshing." Amara smiled. "Thank you." Ethan lingered as the others began to file out. When the door finally closed behind them, he spoke softly. "You were remarkable in there." She met his gaze. "I've had practice being underestimated." He winced slightly, then said, "You've built something extraordinary." She tilted her head. "So have you." "It's different," he admitted. "Yours has heart." For a moment, they stood in the quiet hum of the empty conference room. The air between them carried the ghosts of every word they'd never said. Ethan took a small step closer. "I've thought about you," he said, "more than I should have." Amara looked at him then, not with anger, not with longing, but with the steady calm of someone who had already done the hardest work, forgiving herself. "I used to wait to hear that," she said, "but now I realize it doesn't change anything." He nodded, eyes downcast. "You're right." She picked up her notes, sliding them neatly into her folder. Goodbye, Ethan. When she walked past him, the scent of her perfume lingered. Warm, subtle, unmistakably hers. He turned slightly, watching her go, and in that instant he understood. The woman he once left behind no longer existed. This Amara didn't need to be chosen. She chose herself. That evening, as she stepped out of the office, Lisbon greeted her with a soft wind and the faint hum of fado music from a nearby street. The sky was bruised with sunset, shades of gold and rose fading into indigo. She stopped at a Café Paris overlooking the river, ordered a glass of wine, and watched the city breathe. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Still the same woman, but now luminous in her own right. Across the plaza, couples laughed, children played, and somewhere, a musician sang a song about loss and return. Amara smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because she had learned how to carry it differently, like a stone polished smooth by the river's current. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lucia. The client just called. They're thrilled. You've officially changed the game. Amara typed back simply. We all did. But as she looked out over the city, she knew that wasn't entirely true. Because some transformations don't happen in teams. They happen in mirrors, in heartbreak, in quiet rooms where you finally learn how to rise without applause. And as the river glimmered under the first stars, Amara felt it again. That stillness that isn't emptiness, but power. The kind that speaks softly and changes everything. It began with a single post. One quiet evening, long after the office lights had dimmed and the city had folded itself into the hush of night, Amara opened her laptop. The glow illuminated her face, casting shadows across the walls. On impulse, she started to write, not for work, not for a campaign, but for herself. Her fingers hesitated, then moved. They say starting over is brave, but I think it's more than that. It's holy, because there's something sacred about rebuilding yourself from the ruins, choosing to rise without applause, choosing to love your own company after someone teaches you how cruel loneliness can be. I used to think I was broken. Now I see I was being remade. She didn't plan it, didn't edit it. When she hit publish on her personal blog, it was an act of release, not ambition. She closed the laptop and went to bed, unaware that while she slept, the world would begin to listen. By morning, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Messages, emails, mentions. The post had been shared thousands of times. By afternoon, hundreds of thousands. It wasn't viral because it was perfectly written. It was viral because it was honest. Women from every corner of the world commented, "This is my story. I thought I was the only one. You just put my pain into words." Amara sat on her balcony, stunned. The city buzzed below her, but all she could hear were the voices rising through her screen. Voices of survival, loss, rebirth. She realized then that she hadn't just written for herself. She had spoken into a silence that millions had been trapped inside. Lucia called that afternoon. "You're trending globally," she said, half amused, half awed. "I didn't mean to," Amara replied. "The best things rarely are," Lucia said. "Your truth did what marketing never could. It reminded people of their own." In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to open in unexpected ways. A well-known magazine reached out to feature her story. The strategist who rebuilt her life and taught the world to feel. Then came podcast invitations, panel discussions, and interviews. But through it all, Amara stayed grounded. She still took the tram to work, still walked by the river, still made tea in her chip blue mug every morning. Fame didn't feel like triumph. It felt like resonance. People weren't applauding her. They were recognizing themselves in her voice. One evening, she spoke at a women's summit in Madrid. The room was vast, filled with faces of all ages and colors, each carrying their own invisible scars. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause faded into a stillness so complete she could hear her heartbeat. She began softly. "We spend so much time trying to be unbreakable. But I've learned that being unbreakable isn't the goal. The goal is to break beautifully, to let the cracks become the map of how you found your way home." The room exhaled as one. Some women wiped tears. Others nodded quietly. They told me I was too emotional to lead, too sensitive to survive, too soft to succeed. But here's what they don't tell you. Softness isn't weakness. It's the beginning of every kind of strength that lasts. When she finished, the applause rose like thunder, not for celebrity, but for recognition. That night, back in her hotel room, Amara sat on the bed scrolling through messages from strangers who now felt like sisters. She came across one that made her pause. "You don't know me, but your words stopped me from giving up tonight. Thank you." Her eyes blurred. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She simply pressed her hand to her heart, whispering, "That's why." By summer, her voice had become more than a story. It was a movement. She was invited to collaborate on projects centered on women's empowerment and emotional resilience. Even brands began to echo her tone. Less perfection, more humanity. Lucia often watched her from across the office, proud but quiet. One day she said, "You've turned your pain into architecture. You're building bridges now." Amara smiled. "Maybe that's what we're all supposed to do. Build something out of what tried to destroy us." Lucia nodded. "Most people drown in their stories. You learn to sail." The real test came one afternoon when Amara received a request from a university in Atlanta, her hometown. They wanted her to return for a keynote lecture titled "The Art of Becoming." Atlanta, the city she'd left behind, the one that still smelled of beginnings and heartbreak. She almost said no, but then she thought of her younger self, the girl who'd once followed a man across the world believing love was enough. That girl deserved to see how far they'd come. So she said yes. When she arrived, the city felt both foreign and familiar. The skylines shimmered in the southern sun, the same view she and Ethan had once called forever. She smiled softly at the memory, not with pain, but gratitude. It had taken losing everything to find herself. The auditorium was full. When she walked on stage, she didn't bring notes. She spoke from memory, from the scar that had turned into a story. "There's a version of you," she said, "that's still waiting for permission to become. Give it to her. Don't wait for someone else to name you worthy." The crowd rose to their feet. Cameras flashed, but she barely noticed. Her gaze drifted toward the back of the room, just for a heartbeat, and there he was. Ethan. He didn't approach her afterward. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was enough. It wasn't longing. It was recognition. The quiet realization that she had become untouchable. Not because she had walls, but because she had peace. That night, as her plane lifted back toward Lisbon, Amara watched the city lights shrink beneath her. Somewhere below, the girl she used to be finally exhaled. She rested her head against the window, her reflection faint against the dark. The world was loud with her voice now, echoing through screens, stages, and hearts. But inside her, it was quiet, peaceful, whole. Because when she spoke to the world, she wasn't chasing validation anymore. She was answering a calling. And that, she realized, was the difference between being heard and being understood. Her words no longer needed an audience. They had become her freedom. It began as a whisper, a single idea that haunted Amara during quiet hours, when the world outside was asleep and her thoughts glowed like embers refusing to die. Lucia had noticed it before Amara ever spoke a word. "You're circling something," she said one evening as they watched the river from the office balcony. "You've been writing speeches, essays, posts, but none of them are enough anymore, are they?" Amara smiled faintly. "No, there's something larger trying to get out." Lucia sipped her wine, eyes narrowing with intuition. "Then stop containing it." That night, Amara began. She opened a blank document and typed the title before she even knew the chapters. The Book of Fire. The name came from a dream she'd had months ago, of standing barefoot in the ruins of her old life while a fire burned through the walls around her. She remembered the heat, the fear, and the strange, luminous calm that came when she realized she wasn't being consumed. She was being purified. The book poured out of her like confession and prayer at once. She wrote for 6 months straight, through dawns and storms, in airports and cafes, on trains between conferences. It wasn't a memoir in the traditional sense. It was a series of fragments, letters, essays, memories, all woven together by one truth, that pain, when faced instead of fled, can become its own kind of light. Each chapter burned with honesty. She wrote about love and betrayal, about rebuilding, about the slow forgiveness of oneself. But she also wrote about the small, overlooked joys, a cup of coffee shared with a stranger, laughter after grief, the scent of jasmine on a Lisbon evening. Her editor cried after finishing the first draft. "It's not a book," she said softly. "It's resurrection in words." When the Book of Fire was published, no one expected what followed. Within a week, it topped bestseller lists across Europe and the US. Within a month, readers began posting photos of its pages, underlining sentences that had saved them. Sometimes the fire doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to show you what you were made of. Healing isn't soft, it's violent. It's the tearing of old fabric so the soul can breathe again. Forgiveness is not about saying, "It's okay." It's about saying, "I'm done carrying this weight." Bookstores couldn't keep it in stock. Celebrities quoted it. Therapists recommended it. But more than fame, what struck Amara most were the letters. Handwritten, fragile, trembling with gratitude, from readers who had found in her story a map back to themselves. She read them all. Some she kept in a box labeled, "Proof that it mattered." Then, one afternoon, her publicist walked into her office holding a single, white envelope. "This one didn't come through the usual channels," she said. Amara opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Clean, deliberate, familiar. "Amara, I've read your book twice. The first time, I was angry. The second time, I understood. I used to think strength meant being unbending. You showed me that it means breaking with grace. I'm sorry for the years I stole from you, and the parts of yourself I made you doubt. I hope this letter finds you standing in the fire, not as a victim, but as the flame. Ethan Starr." Amara's hands trembled as she folded the letter. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply sat in silence, staring out the window at the city that had become her witness. Lisbon shimmered in late afternoon gold, and she thought of all the versions of herself that had lived and died to bring her here. The girl who followed him, the woman who broke, the survivor who rebuilt. It was all the same fire, burning through her in different shades. She picked up a pen and wrote her reply, not to send, but to release. "Ethan, I don't need an apology anymore. I needed it once, when I thought closure meant answers. But I've learned that closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you decide. You taught me what love isn't, and that, strangely, became the lesson that saved me. I wish you peace, truly. Amara." When she finished, she folded the note, set it in the same box with the reader letters, and closed the lid. Months passed. The world continued to echo her voice, but fame no longer defined her. She turned down television deals, stepped away from panels. "I don't want to speak louder," she told Lucia. "I want to live quieter." Lucia understood. "Silence is the next chapter, isn't it?" "Yes," Amara said softly. "The one where I don't have to explain anymore." That summer, she rented a small house near the ocean, just north of Cascais. The sea was wild there, the air salted and alive. Every morning she walked barefoot along the shore, letting the waves erase her footprints behind her. Sometimes she'd bring a notebook, not to write another book, but to remember what stillness felt like. One evening, as the sky bled orange into violet, she built a small fire in the sand. She opened a copy of the Book of Fire, flipped to the dedication page, and smiled at the lines she'd written months ago. "For the woman I became when no one was watching." She tore out a single page, the one that began with, "I am no longer afraid of burning," and fed it to the flames. The paper curled and turned to gold, then ash, carried away by the wind. She whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone, but to everything, to the fire, to the breaking, to the life she had rebuilt word by word, breath by breath." Behind her, the waves crashed, steady and eternal. Ahead of her, the horizon blazed open, and for the first time, Amara felt not just healed, but free. The ocean was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that hums, not silence, but a living pulse beneath the waves. Dawn stretched its pale fingers across the sky, painting the horizon in shades of honey and ash. Amara stood barefoot on the cold sand, her scarf fluttering behind her like a memory that refused to settle. The fire pit from the night before still held a faint trace of smoke, thin ribbons rising, twisting, fading into the wind. She had dreamed of this moment once, years ago, when she thought peace was something you earned only after surviving enough pain. But now she knew peace wasn't a trophy. It was a decision, a quiet, steady choosing of yourself over and over again until it became muscle memory. Lisbon had taught her that. Loss had carved it into her bones. And the fire. The fire had revealed the truth hidden beneath the ashes. She closed her eyes and listened. The sea, the wind, the faraway sound of a fisherman's boat, all of it part of a symphony she had once been too heartbroken to hear. That afternoon, Lucia visited. She parked her car by the cliffs and walked down to where Amara sat on the sand, sketching in a notebook. "You've disappeared," Lucia said gently. Amara smiled without looking up. "Not disappeared, just dissolved a little." Lucia sat beside her. "You know, people still quote you everywhere. The book is being studied in universities now. You could tour again, host talks, build a foundation. The world still wants your voice." Amara drew a slow breath. "Maybe the world needs silence just as much." Lucia studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're different, Amara." "I'm lighter," Amara said. "And I don't mean happy. I mean unburdened." They watched the horizon together, the sea turning molten under the setting sun. Lucia finally rose to leave, brushing the sand from her coat. "You built an empire out of ashes," she said softly. "Now, promise me you'll enjoy living in it." Amara smiled. "I promise." That night she sat by the open window, candlelight flickering against the pages of her notebook. She began to write, not for an audience, not for a publisher, but for the woman who had once been too afraid to write at all. "If I've learned anything, it's this. Life doesn't destroy you to punish you. It breaks you open to show you what's still burning inside. And sometimes, when you think you've lost everything, you're just standing at the threshold of becoming." Her handwriting trembled at first, then steadied. "Don't be afraid of the fire. You are not what it burns. You are what survives it." When she finished, she tore out the page, folded it neatly, and placed it in a small glass jar on the windowsill. It was a message, a prayer, a reminder. The candlelight caught it, turning it gold. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine, the same scent that had followed her since Lisbon, like a promise that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Weeks later, she was walking through the city when a young woman stopped her in a bookstore. She couldn't have been more than 20, her eyes bright but uncertain. She held the Book of Fire in her hands, its cover soft from use. Are you Amara Johnson?" the girl asked, voice trembling. Amara smiled gently. "Yes." The girl's eyes filled. "Your words saved me. I was ready to give up, but your story," she broke off, swallowing hard, "it made me believe I could start again." Amara felt her throat tighten. She reached out, taking the girl's hands in hers. "Then promise me something," she said softly. "Promise me you'll keep that belief, even when the fire feels too hot. Promise me you'll remember there's light beneath every layer of ash." The girl nodded through tears. "I promise." And in that moment, Amara understood that her voice was never meant to echo in rooms of power or panels of fame. It was meant to reach one heart at a time, until the quiet ones learned to speak again. That night, the rain came, soft, steady, cleansing. She opened the windows wide and let it wash through the house. The waves thundered against the cliffs, but she felt no fear, only calm, only gratitude. She sat by the fire with a cup of tea, staring into the flames. They danced, the way life does, wild, unpredictable, alive. In the reflection of the glass, she saw herself not as she had been, but as she was now, whole, imperfect, luminous. She whispered, "I forgive you," and she wasn't speaking to anyone else this time. Forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was release. It was walking out of the burning building of her past and realizing she had built the fire escape herself. Outside, the wind carried her words away, scattering them into the night. Somewhere, someone would hear them. Someone who needed to. When dawn returned, she stepped outside barefoot, the sand cool beneath her feet. The tide had receded, leaving seashells glimmering like tiny relics. She picked one up and turned it over in her palm, its surface smooth, its spiral endless. That's what healing was, she thought. Not a straight line, but a spiral, always returning to the same places, but each time with more light. She looked toward the horizon, where the first golden rays were breaking through the gray, and she smiled. Because sometimes, the ending isn't a final chapter. It's just another beginning, lit from within. And as the light rose higher, touching the edges of the water, Amara whispered what had become her truth, her anthem, her legacy. Even after everything burns, something beautiful always grows. If you've ever stood in your own ashes, if you've ever felt broken, unseen, or forgotten, remember Amara's story. Remember that the fire doesn't mean it's over. It means something new is being born. So wherever you are, take a deep breath. Let this be the moment you choose to rise. Like, share, and follow, not just for her story, but for yours. Because somewhere, someone is waiting to see your light beneath their own ashes.